To be royal, as I learned, is to be set apart. It means living a life shaped by ancient rules, inside a fortress of tradition. It's a world filled with gilded carriages, priceless jewels, palaces, and ceremony. In that world, I was expected to become a symbol, an icon frozen in time, seen but not always heard. To the outside world, it looked like a fairy tale. But from the inside, those walls could start to feel like a cage. A beautifully decorated cage. Yes, but still a cage. The rules were clear. You represent the crown. Your duty is to the institution. My feelings, my opinions, my heart, they all had to come second. To be royal was to be a symbol, not a person. But what happens when the voices of the people start to drown out the whispers inside the palace? This is my story. I was told my duty was to the crown, but I chose a different path. A path that would end up changing the world. When I became the Princess of Wales in 1981, I entered a world few could ever imagine. The wedding was watched by 750 million people around the globe. It looked like a real-life fairy tale. I was meant to be a princess for a new generation. But the fantasy of the glass slipper and the handsome prince quickly crumbled, replaced by a much harsher reality. The institution I married into was ancient, rigid, and deeply wary of change. It felt like a machine, one that I had become both a prominent and vulnerable part of. There was no written royal rule book, but its expectations were set in stone. Every gesture I made, every word I spoke, and every outfit I wore was under constant scrutiny. There were strict protocols for everything: how to walk, how to sit, how to speak to dignitaries, even how to wave, and motherhood was no exception. Royal heirs were traditionally educated in private, hidden from the public behind palace walls. As a royal mother, I was expected to remain dignified and keep my distance, leaving the daily care of my children to nannies. As a former nursery assistant, I just couldn't accept that. I wanted to be a hands-on mum, taking my young sons on the school run, to theme parks, and even out to McDonald's. I wanted William and Harry to see life outside the palace gates, to experience what I called the rawness of real life. This was one of the first cracks in the royal facade. While the palace viewed it as a breach of protocol, the public saw a mother who truly adored her children. My choice to pick my own engagement ring from a Garrard catalogue, rather than use a custom-made family heirloom, was another quiet act of rebellion. It was a choice that valued personal taste over old traditions. I even broke protocol by giving birth in a hospital, a modern step that my daughter-in-law, Catherine, would later take as well. But these small acts of defiance came at a cost. The media, once adoring, became oppressive and relentless. Every move I made was documented. Every expression was analysed. The fairy tale princess had become a woman facing unimaginable pressure, and the gilded cage started to feel incredibly lonely. The institution I belonged to valued distance and formality, but I was someone who offered warmth and empathy. I was expected to be an ornament, a beautiful, silent supporter for my husband and the monarchy. But as I looked beyond the palace walls, I found a world in pain, and I felt a strong desire to reach out to it. I once said, I felt that my personality was taken away from me, and I was taken over by the royal machine. The conflict inside me grew stronger, the duty demanded by the crown, versus the calling I felt deep in my heart. Charity work has always been part of the royal job. It's structured and continues traditions. You become a patron, attend galas, cut ribbons, and pose for photos at spotless hospitals. It was a performance of caring always from a safe distance, but for me this sanitized version of charity just wasn't enough. I had a rare, intuitive understanding of human suffering and a deep need to do more than simply appear. I once famously said, anywhere I see suffering, that is where I want to be doing what I can. My official duties took me to hospitals, homeless shelters, and hospices all around the world. But where royal protocol expected a formal gloved handshake, I offered something radically different: human contact. I often refused to wear gloves, a small but powerful break from tradition, because I understood how much of a barrier they could be. I wanted to hold people's hands, to touch a shoulder, and offer a genuine human connection. I even started avoiding hats. Once joking, you can't cuddle a child in a hat. These weren't just style choices, they were statements. They showed a new way of being royal, one based on direct personal connection. I would sit on the beds of sick patients, not just stand beside them, and I'd listen to their stories for hours, even after the cameras were gone. I even brought William and Harry with me to homeless shelters, determined they'd understand that not everyone lives in a palace. I wanted them to understand real emotions, their insecurities and distress, but also their hopes and dreams. This was a big change. The monarchy had always kept a sense of mystery, a distance between royalty and the public, but I was breaking down that barrier, one handshake, one hug, one conversation at a time. I began to realize the incredible power of my platform. If the world's cameras were going to follow me everywhere, I thought, why not lead them somewhere meaningful? This was a true turning point. The glimpses of the outside world weren't just part of a royal tour anymore. They were becoming my purpose. I witnessed the pain caused by poverty, disease, and stigma up close, and I realized that even a small act of kindness from me could send a powerful message of hope to those who felt forgotten. While the palace thought I was over the top, the public saw something different. A princess who wasn't afraid to step in, who showed a sincerity you simply couldn't fake. There comes a time when quiet rebellion just isn't enough. For me, that time was during the global AIDS crisis of the 1980s. It was an era of intense fear and devastating misinformation. The disease was new, terrifying, and deeply stigmatized. People believed HIV could spread with just a simple touch. Those diagnosed were often abandoned by their families and left to face the end alone. This was exactly the sort of difficult issue the royal establishment tended to avoid. But I saw the human story behind the frightening headlines. In April 1987, I made a decision that would help define my legacy. I visited London's Middlesex Hospital to open the UK's very first unit dedicated to HIV and AIDS. There, in front of the world's press, I did something simple but revolutionary. Without gloves, I shook hands with a man living with AIDS. In that moment, a global taboo was broken. That single gesture of compassion was a direct challenge to fear and prejudice. The message couldn't have been clearer. As I said, HIV does not make people dangerous to know, so you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. I understood that the loneliness and rejection these patients faced was its own form of suffering, so I chose to fight it with pure empathy. My touch combined with my role could do more to change minds than 1,000 medical pamphlets ever could. This was an intentional act of defiance, a conscious decision to lead with my heart, not just by the book. The palace was reportedly uneasy with my focus on such a controversial issue, but I didn't back down. I kept visiting AIDS hospices around the world, often quietly and without media attention, just to offer comfort. I held babies with the virus in Brazil and spent time in orphanages, always sharing physical affection. This was the heart of my revolution. The palace had its rules, but people had needs that couldn't wait for protocol. My friend Sir Elton John would later say that I showed the world this illness required compassion, not fear. Nelson Mandela even praised me, saying that simply sitting on a patient's bed and holding his hand could help transform attitudes everywhere. I wasn't just a member of the royal family anymore. I was becoming what many would come to know me as the People's Princess. I found my purpose not in gilded palaces, but in the quiet rooms of hospices and hospitals, among the very people society had cast aside. Choosing compassion over protocol isn't easy. It doesn't happen without resistance. Every time I stepped outside the strict lines of royal duty, I faced criticism from the establishment. It seemed that the more the public adored me for my warmth, the more wary the palace became. My openness was now viewed as a threat to the monarchy's carefully crafted image of stoic detachment. I was becoming more popular than the future king, and my independent mission was seen as a direct challenge to tradition. The backlash reached its peak in January 1997, just months before my death. By that time I was divorced, forging my own path, and I traveled to Angola with the Red Cross. My goal was to bring global attention to the devastating crisis of landmines. Decades of civil war had left Angola littered with millions of mines, making it the country with the highest percentage of amputees in the world. It was a forgotten war, and its victims were invisible. But my visit changed everything. The defining image of that trip and one of the most iconic moments of my life was of me walking through a partially cleared minefield, wearing a protective vest and visor. Those photos were seen around the world, and they instantly transformed landmines from just a military issue into an urgent human rights crisis. I met children who had lost limbs. I sat with them. I held their hands. My empathy was impossible to ignore. Some British politicians reacted quickly and harshly. They called me a loose cannon and accused me of interfering in foreign policy. But to me, all that controversy was just a distraction. I was there to shine a light on tremendous human suffering, a cause I knew was bigger than politics. And I was right. The response from the public and the international community was overwhelmingly positive. My visit brought global attention to the issue like never before, putting huge pressure on governments to finally take action. Just a few months later, in December 1997, the Ottawa Treaty was signed by 122 nations banning anti-personnel landmines. Many people contributed to this campaign, but it's widely acknowledged that my advocacy provided the final push that made it happen. This was my ultimate breakthrough. I faced my critics and proved that one determined person with compassion and a platform. My true authority didn't come from the crown, it came from the hearts of the people I stood up for. A legacy isn't measured by years, but by the lives we touch. Though my own life was tragically short, I hope the impact I made is immeasurable. My goal was to redefine what it means to be royal in the modern world, shifting the role from a passive symbol to an active, engaged humanitarian. I want my legacy to be more than tiaras and banquets. I hope it lives on in demolished stigmas and in lives that were saved. Before I came along, the monarchy was often seen as stuffy and out of touch. I tried to bring it closer to people to show its human side. That paved the way for a new generation of royals, including my own sons, William and Harry. I see them continuing that hands-on, compassionate approach. They're carrying on important work with causes like mental health, a topic I was among the first to speak about openly, and the fight to end landmines. What I hope will be my most lasting legacy is the idea that your title is not as important as your actions. I once famously said, I'd like to be a queen in people's hearts, because I wanted my influence to come from love and service, not just from birthright. I've always believed that everyone deserves to be valued, and that everyone has something meaningful to give. That idea guided everything I did, from hugging AIDS patients to comforting people with leprosy. My goal was to show the world that empathy isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. I wanted people to see that being vulnerable can connect us, and that leading with your heart is much stronger than following a rule book. I was a rebel with a cause. I didn't ignore the crown out of disrespect, but because I felt called to a higher duty, a duty to those who are lonely, sick, or forgotten. I was a princess who chose to be a person first. By doing so, I hope to become an icon whose light has never faded. My belief in the power of young people to change the world lives on through the Diana Award, a charity that celebrates and empowers young leaders today. I encourage you to learn more about their work and about the incredible young people who continue my legacy. In the end, my story isn't a tragedy about a lost princess. It's an inspiring journey of a woman who found herself by refusing to accept the limits placed on her. I was told my world was the palace, but I made the entire world my cause. I hope I've shown you that you don't need a crown to make a difference. The most powerful legacy you can leave is one of kindness.